Hello, my friends! Today, I will be recapping a series called Silo. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. In the dystopian world of Silo, humanity struggles to survive in enormous underground silos, sheltered from the toxic and uninhabitable outside world. The story revolves around a group of survivors who uncover dark secrets lurking within their isolated community. The series begins with a man pinning his sheriff badge to his shirt and preparing his room. What Holston is about to do will change everything. He emerges into the giant base for which numerous people are living. They're inside a great silo, but all the residents are in the dark over what their purpose is and what they're doing here. They don't know when it'll be safe to venture outside either, but one thing's for sure, it's not right now. Sheriff Holston heads into Holding 3 and looks outside the window. He locks the door and throws the keys outside, telling Morris that he really wants to go outside to meet his beloved. For now, he's locked himself up and decides to stay on his bed. As the deputy shows, Holston tells him he wants to venture outside. We then cut back in time to see Holston with his partner, Allison. They're trying for a baby and things are looking good. It's their third and final time of trying, given Allison is 38. She has her birth control implant removed by the doctor and the pair prepare for what's to come. At dinner, an old woman called Gloria shows up and urges Allison to come to see her. Holston is not happy with this, pointing out that she's a fraud as Gloria has a reputation for making her subjects do whatever she wants, promising them the world for nothing. This soon subsides as the days pass and the pair continue to try and get pregnant. Allison actually works as a reporter, but whilst there, she's reprimanded by her boss, Bernard. Allison has been breaking the rules and she's called out for it. She's been asking questions about the rebels and the before times. They have the pact in place which forbids questions like this, and Sheriff Holston is not happy with the way this conversation is going. As for Allison, she's confronted by Gloria, who speaks to her in private. She runs the tap to make sure the judicial team can't hear her, as she goes on to point out what's happening outside. She knows that Allison is someone that wonders. Gloria questions whether the authorities actually want her to get pregnant, hinting at some sort of conspiracy theory. Allison and Holston continue to try and get pregnant, even having sex at the work desk. While this simmers away in the background, Allison meets George Wilkins, who happens to be a repair guy. He's printed out her post online and is operating in the shadows to avoid the gaze of the judicial. He's been trying to retrieve an old drive that's over 140 years old. Given they've been told that all of them were destroyed, this throws their entire history and what they've been told into disarray. While the pair work, everyone else celebrates their Freedom Day, with big banners up and all the members of the silo gathered to greet the judicial and cheer. The mayor gives a rousing speech about remembering the terror of the rebellion and how they destroyed everything, including all the books and the computer drives. As she speaks, we cut back to Allison and George, who both find plans for the silo blueprints on this drive. Allison loses her nerve, believing this is a relic and it's forbidden to have it, and tells George that he needs to destroy it. Allison heads back to see Gloria, becoming ever more disillusioned with what's happening inside the silo. In fact, she decides to finally see everything, moving between Gloria and George to understand what may be hidden from them. The final file with the latter happens to be a video that could change everything. A cleaner called Jane is outside the silo, and her video footage shows birds flying outside. As a result of this, Allison drifts further away from Holston. She tells him that night that she's not okay, but she will be. Unfortunately, their year of potential baby-making comes and goes, but Allison doesn't show up at the clinic for their meeting about the baby. Allison is actually back home, and with the tap running, she confronts Holston about what she's found out. She was going to talk to him the night before, but needed proof to confirm the enforcers were never going to let them have kids. Her birth control was never taken out, evidenced by a bloody knife and the actual implant on the table. Holston realizes his wife has cut herself open, and he races off to get help for her. However, Allison isn't in their cabin anymore. She's in the cafeteria. She makes a big scene and tries to convince everyone that they need to listen. When they don't, she tells everyone inside the silo that she wants to go outside. This is a crime inside the silo, as evidenced earlier in the season, and she's taken away in handcuffs. Unfortunately, both George Wilkins and Gloria are both questioned too as a result of Allison's ties with them. Holston believes that the stress of not having a baby has deterred her, and that's why she's acting this way. Well, Allison is completely lucid and understands what's happening. She believes that the images inside the silo have been distorted and changed to stop them from going out. But why? Well, Allison is determined to find out. Allison is strapped up and ready to go outside. She's to clean the exterior of the silo, and she's convinced that she's not going to die. This is hard for Holston to take, though, who's convinced that she will. He does his job and reads out the oath, confirming that inside is safe and the outside is not. After, Allison tells him she loves him and prepares to take the walk outside. This happens to be directly opposite the cell, too, and Holston eventually presses the button and lets the large door shut, keeping Allison out the silo. However, we don't see exactly what's there because there's a long climb to the surface. On the alleged window inside the cafeteria, Allison steps up and looks around. She makes it to the window and begins cleaning. With the view clearer than before, Allison walks away from the silo. Only in doing so, she collapses, crawling toward the remnants of a gnarled tree. She's dead. Or is she? That's something I'm sure we're going to find out. We then jump forward 2 years later. Holston's whole world has fallen apart. George Wilkins has been transferred to mechanical a year back, but he's shown up as dead, which is a bit suspicious. There's an engineer down there who's convinced that it's murder. The woman down there, Juliet Nichols, is someone whom Holston has been in contact with for a while, which we learn as narration cuts us back to the present timeline, where Holston is determined to find out the truth. Holston prepared to head outside. Once out the airlock, he's away from the law. He apologizes to them all for the fuss and prepares to brave the outside world. He makes the long climb up the stairs, ready for whatever may lay outside. Everyone joins together in the cafeteria to see Holston emerge from underground and into the wasteland beyond. "Damn it, Allison, you were right," Holston says, as it seems like outside actually is this beautiful paradisiac area. But there's something wrong. He starts to choke and eventually collapses on the ground. Nobody has taken their helmet off before, so Holston is the first, and he begins crawling toward Allison's body, where he collapses and seems to die. Juliet is livid and takes off, shouting, "He's a liar!" She heads down to engineering and tries to keep herself in check. In her rage, she throws something and bursts one of the pipes. With the sheriff gone, the attention turns to who will pick up the mantle and take over. They're up to Sheriff number 97, and with the sparks of rebellion rumbling in the streets, given the lack of law and order, things don't look good. In fact, an opportunist called Sims shows up and begins organizing traffic. It's been 3 months since George died during our timeline this episode, which cuts back in time. Juliet is convinced that he was murdered. He wanted to show Juliet something before he died, which includes a letter and a Pez dispenser which seems to hint at something. When George doesn't show up in her bunk, news of his death spreads. This catches us up to the moments from last episode, as Holston shows up to question Juliet about George's death. He seems to have fallen 100 feet, and there's no witnesses here, given it occurred at 3 a.m. Suicide is apparently a crime here, but Juliet is convinced that he wouldn't have killed himself. She confides in Holston and tells him as much, even going on to mention that George has left something for her. She doesn't want him to rat her out regarding this relic, so Holston agrees to bend the truth a little and claim that he just found it, rather than that he got it from her. Juliet shows that the letter reads, "Remember where you last saw this?" which is a message only Juliet can decipher. It's to do with the Pez dispenser, and she leads Holston into a secret area, hidden behind a large sign and down a hidden tunnel. With a torch in hand, they continue until the bottom of the stairs, where they come to a large open area. There, Juliet shows off the remnants of a huge spidery digger robot. Apologies for the lack of a technical term here. Anyway, this thing is just a husk now, given all the precious materials that have been stripped and taken off it. However, it's enough to open Holston's eyes to a whole world that's been hidden in plain sight. The pair arrive at a makeshift camp down there, which happens to be the location George hinted at with the letter. These are all relics from the old world, including a camcorder that Juliet is struggling to turn on. He sold and traded relics in his spare time. Juliet notices something different this time. a piece of string that tracks all the way across to a suspended piece of steel. Attached on the end happens to be a bag holding even more relics. There's instructions on recovering deleted files, with Allison's handwriting on the back. There's also the computer drive too, but Holston reminds her that asking questions is dangerous. Part of Holston's interest here comes from Juliet's connection to George, and in particular his ties with Allison. His wife was never afraid, and in a way Holston sees some of his wife in Juliet. He tells her to stop wearing the watch as it draws attention, and he promises to keep looking into this in secret and figure out what the truth is. Back in the present, Deputy Marnes happens to have a letter from Holston, his final letter. He recommends Juliet Nichols to take over his role, along with taking on all his personal belongings too. Now, given Juliet was waiting for a sign, this could well be an indication as to what he meant, so she can take over his role. As for Juliet, her little outburst about calling Holston a liar is linked to him not giving her a sign and helping to find out what happened to George. Given George was driven to find out the truth, that role has now turned to Juliet to take over. Juliet drops a whole load of rope down that suspended steel beam and intends to rappel down, believing it could hold a clue to what's happening here. There's nothing down there. It does, however, spill out her emotions, and she begins drinking, trying to wash away the bitter memories of George's death. In the morning, Juliet struggles to get up with her alarm ringing in her ear. Her door is wide open and a fellow engineer shows, asking her questions. Before they have to answer, a distinct rumbling snaps Juliet out of her half-drunk stupor. She races down to engineering, where she immediately smacks a kid called Cooper in the face who's investigating the generator and takes charge of the situation. Juliet is pulled into a meeting with the head of engineering, who tries to work out exactly what she's doing. After punching Cooper in the face, he tells her she's to take the day off and sober up. He reminds her she should be grateful that he's not sending her to the trash line or doing any other menial, unpleasant job after her outburst. The deputy meets the mayor and the pair head down to judicial together, only they hesitate at the door. Mayor Ruth has a rather tenuous relationship with Judge Meadows, so Ruth heads deeper down the silo where he runs into Bernard. He's been crunching the numbers and warns that without a sheriff watching over everything, the likelihood of big riots and citizens arming themselves is increasing every second. Mayor Ruth steps up her investigation into Juliet's candidacy, this time turning toward Juliet's father, who happens to be one of the doctors down in the lower levels. He points out that Juliet has had massive interest in machines from an early age, but to be honest, he doesn't tell them much more. Ruth is unsure exactly why she's been recommended by Holston to take over his role, but the mayor tries to figure that out. While sitting and eating together, the deputy and mayor are interrupted by Sims. He pitches Ruth the name of Paul Billings, who is apparently the perfect guy for the sheriff role, but Ruth is not deterred and promises to make her choice when she's ready. Having sobered up, Juliet remains dedicated to fixing the generator and keeping the silo running. When she asks Juliet to take this on, though, she outright declines, pointing out that the generator is not well and she needs to try and fix it. Despite her rejection, the mayor does hand over Holston's old sheriff badge, telling her Holston wanted her to have this regardless. There seems to be something carved on the back of the badge. As a result, Juliet changes her mind and agrees to take on the role. However, it comes with a catch. She needs to fix the generator first and warns that they need to turn it off completely in order to do that. She's confident she can repair it, but it will mean there will be an 8-hour period of blackout. Down in mechanical, the engineers discuss what this really means, given it could actually blow up should they keep the generator off for too long. The slightest mistake could leave everyone in the dark forever, or even kill someone. That's a convenient detail Juliet omitted from the mayor, but Ruth and the deputy turn their attention to the maintenance of the silo itself, agreeing to keep watch of the gun cabinet and make sure it's completely safe. The generator is turned off, and Juliet works with Cooper to try and find and fix the issue. Cooper is clumsy and drops one of the fan blades, which clutters onto the ground below. Juliet encourages him to focus, while the rest of the engineers down below work to straighten it out so they can put it back on again. Time is running out, though. They have very limited time to try and get this generator up and running again, and Juliet heads deep into the depths of the generator when they start to get warning lights, blasting it with cold water to try and cool the machine down. With a hose hitting the worst offended part, it works for the time being, but it's still touch and go for a while. They eventually get Juliet out. Everything is put back the way it was, and the generator is turned back on. While everyone cheers, Juliet's victory is hollow given she knows how close they came to annihilation. She's also saddened by the fact she's got to make good on her promise too, with her shipped off to become sheriff too. So what's on Holston's badge? Just before Juliet leaves engineering, she flips it over to reveal one word: truth. We flip back to Mayor Ruth one more time, who looks under the weather. She walks away from the deputy, suddenly collapses on the floor and begins convulsing and bleeding from the mouth. The deputy screams for help. Juliet called up to the mayor's office. This is, of course, about Ruth. She's dead. Deputy Marnes is shocked, and he speaks to Bernard and Sims, believing that she's been spiked with rat poison. Ruth wasn't the target, though, as it seems like Marnes was the one intending to be killed. If Ruth hadn't drunk from his bottle, perhaps she'd still be alive, and the deputy is torn up over that fact. Bernard is actually sworn in to be the interim mayor for the time being, and that also means that he'll be swearing in Juliet as the sheriff, too. She's eventually shown over to the sheriff's office, but her assistant, Sandy, does not make life easy for her. There's prejudices against those in the bottom 50 levels, but Juliet gives as good as she gets. She wants access to files and the gun cabinet, but Sandy is loath to hand those details over until she's been sworn in officially. Juliet concedes and points out she only wants one file, that being George Wilkins. Juliet eventually throws her weight around and reminds Sandy that she's the one in charge, and right now, she wants Wilkins' file. That doesn't stop her from looking around herself, though, and her search brings her over to Holding 3, the infamous area that leads up to the surface. Interspersed around this are flashbacks showing more of Juliet's history with her PA. Her brother Jacob is not in a good state, and despite surviving an initial scare, it seems from a further sequence that he didn't make it. And neither did her mum either. Juliet heads down to recycling alone and drops off a lot of the gear from her apartment, although the friendly man there encourages her to keep hold of Jacob's favorite toy. Juliet has always had a fascination with fixing things. Back in the present, Bernard swears in Juliet as sheriff officially before she heads back to the office. Sandy returns not long after and tells her that there is no George Wilkins file. However, Holston did leave behind a file for whoever got the job. This happens to include a handwritten note and a cryptic clue. Before Juliet can look into this, though, Deputy Marnes ends up in a sticky situation down in the market as he begins smacking around a guy called Frankie, believing he's the one with the poison. A year back, Frankie poisoned 2 levels with rat poison. Deputy Marnes is frustrated that no one else is taking the Ruth murder seriously, and it's enough for Juliet to actually open up to him about what she's been doing. She points out exactly what she told Holston about George's murder and was told to wait for a sign. She believes it's the sheriff badge reading truth. In exchange for figuring out what happened to Ruth, Juliet wants Marnes to help find out who murdered George. The pair end up in a tenuous agreement. Juliet's history down in recycling allows her to actually have a better relationship with these people than Marnes would have. And perhaps even Holston, too. Down in Martha's lab, Martha manages to fix up the camcorder that Juliet was messing about. However, we don't see the outcome of that. Instead, we cut back to Juliet in her office as she decides to look at the rattling in the vents. This is something Bernard mentioned earlier, and it's perhaps a good thing she didn't agree to let someone take a look. When she does this herself, she notices something hanging there, which seems to be a vital clue. She brings the rattling chain out, which is linked to a bag full of papers. It's the George Wilkins file. We jump to Deputy Marnes one more time. It's after hours and he's drunk. However, whilst there, he's suddenly attacked by someone who holds him up at gunpoint. Juliet looking through George's file. There are transcripts of his conversation with the police, along with various documents, but nothing untoward at first glance. Juliet is unsure why Holston has hidden all of this. However, she's distracted by news filtering in of Deputy Marnes' death. His body isn't even cold, and Sims is there to announce there's a new deputy sheriff in Paul Billings who's coming in to fill the spot. He's the guy whom Bernard and Sims wanted to take Juliet's position originally, so naturally there's a level of distrust there. When Juliet checks over Marnes' body, she finds a slip of paper with Doris circled. After taking it, believing it to be another clue. She heads back to the management group, Sims, Paul, and Bernard, with the latter deciding that they should do a double funeral for both Marnes and Johns. Bernard deduces that they can spin the story of them being forbidden lovers. Bernard also believes a race to the top could be a good way of celebrating Ruth's tenure as mayor, despite her ironically hating this idea while in office. The funeral goes ahead, with each person taking a bite of an apple in this makeshift orchard and throwing it in alongside the bodies. When Juliet returns to her office, she finds Hank staring at the Holding 3 door. He got an invite to the burial, but he decided not to go with everyone else. Andy comes up with a proposition. She'll help Juliet get what she wants in exchange for figuring out who killed Marnes, and not via the official channels either. Sandy knows how things work and warns that things could get disorderly quickly, to get Billings in and to frame some poor innocent guy for these murders. Juliet and Billings head out to try and get some answers. After speaking to Charles Martin, Juliet ditches Billings and heads back to see Patrick Kennedy. As we know, Doris was his wife before she passed away, and there's no love lost between him and Marnes. With the sheriff badge in hand, Juliet breaks in and decides to look around. While we don't see this on screen, we do learn later on that there's planted evidence in his place. As a result, Juliet decides to find Patrick and put him somewhere safe. Billings returns to Judicial rather than heading home for lunch, where he finds a guy called Doug is working to be Sim's shadow. The chatter is cryptic, but Billings does return to Juliet and admit where he's been. Apparently, Judicial get reports from people who don't officially exist, but they've come up with a name, suggesting Ralph Melby is the guy whom they're looking at to arrest. Now, all of this is an elaborate ruse to oust Juliet as a disgrace, having arrested the wrong guy, while the planted evidence in Kennedy's apartment would be found, and then him declared the killer. Juliet would then be sent back to mechanical, and things would return to the status quo. Juliet nods thoughtfully, then decides to arrest Kennedy instead. Juliet returns and finds Doug outside the building, wanting to try and get in. Juliet susses out that he's the man responsible for planting evidence, and she gives chase through the silo. Doug and Juliet spiral down until the latter ends up hanging on for dear life. She manages to stop Doug, breaking his finger in the process. Juliet is thankfully saved and she returns to her office. Doug returns to Sims, with the latter deciding that he's going to be his shadow from this moment forward. He knows the guy has made a lot of mistakes, especially with George Wilkins and now Marnes. After reciting the words, Sims pushes Doug off the edge of the silo. Juliet heads to see Judge Meadows with news of what occurred between Marnes and Johns, including how Doug was on the run and took his own life with his arrest imminent. Meadows is incredulous over this, but realizes it will quell the conspiracy theories and should be enough to put the issue to bed for good. Back at the office, Juliet learns that Sandy has been reassigned, voluntarily so she can be closer to her family. She actually didn't know that Juliet would solve the Marne murder so quickly, if at all, but she gives a surprise compliment to Juliet for her good work. Juliet heads back to see Martha that night to catch up. She knows Juliet was hanging from the railing earlier on and urges her to speak up. Juliet won't, wanting to protect her, but she does point out that there's nothing in the Wilkins file. Martha also points out that there are two big mysteries regarding the pact. First of all, they stipulate that one can't mechanize the way they go up and down in the silo, and two, there's no magnification beyond a certain power. Juliet believes that she's managed to gain Bernard's trust after solving these two murders, and wants to use Judicial and management to figure out what happened to George Wilkins properly. In order to do that, she needs to use the right bait, and that comes from the Pez dispenser. Juliet breaking into Trumbull's apartment, determined to find anything that may lead to why he killed Marnes. But of course, we know this is one big ruse. She's joined by her new deputy chief, Billings, who finds the Pez dispenser, the one that Juliet planted ahead of time. Further flashbacks show Juliet and George's intimate relationship, and it soon becomes obvious as to what's fueling Juliet's desire to find out what happened to him, and figure out what other secrets the silo may be hiding. Juliet fixes up George's watch in these flashbacks too, as Juliet explains that she did so because it makes her feel good to know that he's feeling good. This also helps to shed light on why she's so adamant about wearing the watch and keeping it with her. In the office, Juliet searches the archives to try and find evidence of the Pez dispenser. However, Billings shows, and he's pretty jittery, explaining to Juliet that keeping a relic beyond its 12-hour period and not handing it over to Judicial is a serious crime. However, a note comes in for Juliet from Ellie, telling her she doesn't know what Juliet is looking for, but will keep her updated if that changes. Juliet does eventually head over to Judicial, where she's reacquainted with the judge. She brings up the relic and uses this as a way of trying to broach the subject of opening a new investigation into relics that haven't yet been documented. Sims agrees, but under the pretense that Paul joins her through the whole investigation. Outside the office, Billings warns that Judicial are going to be watching Juliet like a hawk as a result of this, so she needs to be careful. As for Sims, he pores over the relic and begins looking through the archives himself, which includes a large, locked safe with numerous red bags and a whole bunch of folders. Billings and Juliet show up to see Regina Jackson, who recognizes George Wilkins's watch. She claims it belonged to her boyfriend. When she finds out George is dead, she's not particularly torn up about it and is more interested in the watch. She puts two and two together when Juliet mentions she worked with George in mechanical. Regina explains that her relationship to George wasn't sanctioned, but she's wiped her hands of this, pointing out that George has a good way with words and went down to mechanical to explore the big questions. Just before they leave, Regina hits one more proverbial dart to the chest, asking Juliet if she believes George when he told her he loved her. It throws everything Juliet knew about the man into question, and she begins doubting herself. Bernard and Sims confront Juliet about the relic thereafter and want answers. They point out that this relic belongs to George Wilkins, and they did a thorough search of his place before he died and found nothing. It seems a bit suspect that this dispenser would just inexplicably show up in Trumbull's apartment. They indirectly accuse Juliet of planting evidence, something we know they're not above doing. But Bernard actually stands up for Juliet, pointing out that Trumbull may have taken the relic for himself, especially if he was part of the search team. Bernard shrugs it off in the end, deciding to leave the mystery unsolved, but does give a side-eyed glance to Juliet when he leaves, seemingly believing that he's covering for her. Billings is not happy at the quickness Juliet would throw him under the bus, given his name was immediately brought up in the conversation regarding the relic. Billings wants Juliet to trust him, pointing out that he has a family and could have been sent to clean outside because of her carelessness. That night, Juliet reflects over George's illegal questions. These, as we soon come to learn, stem from the ultimate mystery that hovers over this entire series. What if everything here is all one big lie and illusion? Juliet isn't sure what to do, but realizes she's in over her head, especially as George has lied to her the whole time. She radios through to Martha, telling her this is a complete waste of time. Martha, though, retorts back that time is much more important than that, and she needs to decide what sort of person she is. Juliet heads back to see Regina that night, who points out there's more going on here than Juliet knows. Judicial come during the day and ask the easy questions, but the man who knows everything comes at night. Turning on the fan to mask her voice, Regina brings up how Judicial know exactly what's going on, and this shadowy figure actually recited all the names of people she'd spoken to each day. Scaring her half to death, Regina gave up all the names for relic dealers she knew to save her mother and protect her family. And that included George Wilkins, too, connecting all of this together. Juliet asks about the hard drive when Regina brings it up casually, but despite not seeing it, she admits she exchanged the hard drive for a relic that predates the rebellion. In fact, this is so ancient and secret that if she reveals what's inside this envelope to anyone else, it'll get her killed. Hurriedly heading back to her apartment, Juliet opens up the package to find a book called The Amazing Adventures of Georgia. Inside happen to be a whole bunch of incredible sights on offer, and it's signed by everyone that this book has been passed down to over time. However, as the camera zooms out, we see that someone in a control room is watching all of this unfold on a whole bunch of monitors. He turns to his partner and tells him to wake him up to see this. We see Gloria again, who happens to be by the beach, fingering a shell while reminiscing on old memories with her family. Gloria is soon thrust back into reality as she ends up in her bedroom with a nurse by her side, who injects her with a serum that sedates her. "I have to find them," Gloria says blearily, before the drugs seem to take hold. Juliet notices all the different names that have signed the book, including George, and, interestingly, Gloria. She's still unaware that she's being watched, but she does notice that the Gloria file is with her, so she scoops it up and decides to leave. As she does, the boss shows up in the security center. And who is that? Well, it's Sims. It turns out this is all within the silo after all. Juliet heads back to her office and decides to run a search on Gloria. Paul Billings rocks up not long after and reveals that she has messages. The mayor, Bernard, also wants a meeting, but Juliet shrugs it off, deciding to reschedule instead. Juliet heads down to long-term care and, as sheriff, discovers Gloria's whereabouts. She's completely out of it, but Juliet wants to take her out for a walk. Unfortunately, Judge Meadows has an order to keep her there. Juliet barges into the judge's office, but she's not there. Juliet doesn't care about protocol and decides to wait for her. However, she's apparently in her room because she's sick. In the wake of this, there's big drama down on one of the floors as a big fight that breaks out. It's absolute chaos, and without the sheriff around, Billings has trouble controlling the situation. It turns out a bar on floor 26 was trashed that previous night, which seems to be a group from the mids. Billings is livid when he feeds this back to Juliet, pointing out that the people are scared and jittery, and they need their sheriff to keep things stable. Billings points out that he actually lied for her and could lose his job for this. It's actually enough for Juliet to open up and reveal that what she's really doing here is searching for the truth around the murders. She's also conflicted because Wilkins lied to her this whole time. Billings decides to let Juliet investigate this and keep everything under wraps, but similarly tells her she needs to stop neglecting her duties and meet with the mayor. As one last act of help, Billings also reveals that the judge lives on level 15 in the manager's row. She has breakfast delivered every morning, which gives Juliet a way in. With this mulling over in her mind, Juliet meets with the mayor in the morning, who has big news. It turns out he's received a threat from Judge Meadows. He believes that Meadows may actually be in the process of hijacking the servers, given this would give her a way to ultimately control the silo. Bernard wants Juliet to help, but when he finds out that Billings is helping, he's quick to remind her that Paul Billings is her replacement. Juliet shows up as scheduled at Meadows' door, wanting answers over what's happening down on long-term care. Specifically, she wants answers about Gloria. Juliet demands she lift the order. If she does that, then Juliet will hand in her badge at the end of the week. However, Meadows points out that she can't do that, and that it's literally not possible as they won't allow it. Juliet realizes that Meadows is just another cog in a hidden system of control, and she leaves empty-handed. However, Sims has been watching them this whole time, and it seems like he could actually be the one pulling the strings. Juliet heads down to see her father and asks for a favor. She wants him to help get Gloria out, and also to flush her system free of drugs. It's dangerous, of course, but she does manage to convince her dad to pull through for her. It's definitely touch and go for a while, as Juliet manages to get him to wheel her out and into a secure nursery that's not being watched or bugged. There is a reversing agent to help flush out the sedatives quicker than the allotted 5 or 6 hours, which Juliet absolutely does not have. But there's also side effects to this too. Still, it's worth a shot to get some answers. Gloria starts to have a seizure, bringing back awful memories of Juliet's past. Thankfully, they both manage to get Gloria through this in one piece. However, they still need to wait. As they twiddle their thumbs and hope things pass quickly, Sims heads down into janitorial, which happens to hold the secret room leading down into the security consoles. They've called Sims down because they have no idea where Juliet is. Sims organizes traffic and orders the group to try and find Juliet. When Gloria comes around, she realizes that Juliet's father is one of them, part of the group of doctors that experimented on her and stopped her from having a baby. Juliet ushers her father out, knowing that he's upsetting Gloria. Alone, Juliet hands over George's book. Apparently, George's mum was one of them, one of the Flame Keepers. These folks are being erased. The Flame Keepers are the colloquial term for the rebels fighting back against the silo. The silo, run by the authorities, are trying to put their flame out. The silo wanted the rebels to die off, and the doctors all knew about this and were in on it from the start. Gloria, though, figured it out after the lottery, with her husband Henry pushed away as a result of them not being able to have children. When she saw him again, Henry was with his kids in his new family setup and pretended not to know her. This seems to explain why some people can't have children here. When Gloria brings up George Wilkins, Juliet unfortunately breaks the news that he was murdered a year ago, but it was made out to be an accident. Gloria recognizes Juliet after holding one of the babes in the nursery and points out that her mother could well have been a flamekeeper, and although she wasn't, she did possess that same curiosity. Gloria points out that when they lost her, it was like losing one of their own. When Gloria is taken back to long-term care, Juliet confronts her father about the cruelty behind the fertility and tricking the women. Juliet is livid, but she plays her role well as she claims that Gloria was out wandering about when she heads into long-term care and finds an orderly there. Interestingly, Sims picks her up on the screens here and is none the wiser by this point over where she's been. Before Juliet says her goodbyes, she does hand over the book and lets Gloria look at the beach one more time. Apparently, Holston came to see her a few years back, and he's the one who placed flowers right in front of the mirror. Now, this is of course a recurring motif that Juliet is aware of, given she too was given a message to double the flowers in front of the mirror. Now it makes sense for her, as she realizes the mirrors are being used to conceal cameras. Juliet lowers her voice to a whisper, as Gloria points out that there's something in the vents. Juliet, having realized that the mirror holds a hidden camera, blocks it off with a cloth and decides to search inside. Juliet is shocked to find a bag holding the missing hard drive Juliet was looking for and realizes she needs to go. Gloria urges, telling Juliet to do what her mother would have wanted her to do. The raiders, an armed militia at Sims' beck and call, burst into the room. The next scene in the past, with Hannah walking through to meet Mosley down in the cornfields. She's with a young Juliet, and the pair make a trade. He hands over a box, but in doing so is quick to point out that the silo always wins. It turns out there's a rabbit inside, and on the way back to their home, Hannah tells her daughter they're not going to eat it, as it'll be part of a larger experiment. In the present, Juliet evades capture, hiding in the nursery while Sims shows up to see Gloria. He notices the vents have been opened, and he wants answers. Given she was unresponsive with the guards, he hopes she's going to be answering his questions instead. He wants her help, and promises she won't be kept from her dreams if she does. After all, Sims has fathered a son thanks to her skills. Sims' dedication to the silo trumps all, though, and all he needs to know is what's inside the vent. She mentions the bag, but the contents of which are still unknown. Sims has her medicated and kept under strict surveillance while he heads out, determined to find Juliet. They've lost her on the staircase, and Sims is quick to get everyone mobilized to track down her position. Juliet, though, is still in the nursery and now on her own, boots up the computer and tries in vain to access the hard drive. That's denied, though, and she ends up sleeping on the floor, too. She's awoken by an alert from Billings. Rushing back to the office, she finds a whole bunch of guards turning the place inside out. They're on the hunt for unregistered relics. Juliet is not alien to these searches, given she experienced this with her parents as guards showed up off the back of that earlier trade, demanding she hand over a relic, coming in the form of a magnifier. Juliet's father convinces Hannah to hand over the relic, and after assembling it, she's forced to watch it be completely destroyed. The judicial department also wants the rabbit, but they lie and claim they've eaten it. This also sows the seeds of doubt between Juliet and Pete, too, despite the latter claiming he never actually ratted his wife out to the authorities. Back in the present, Juliet believes Sims is the one calling the shots and the judge is just a puppet, a fake figurehead to draw the attention away from the head of security. Given the search inside the office is actually illegal, Juliet decides to play them at their own game, and alongside Billings, the pair head to judicial to stake their case. In fact, Sims is arrested for organizing an illegal search. Sims is surprised, but he comes willingly, although he is quick to point out that she's only in charge for now and that Juliet will regret her actions. Left alone in judicial, Juliet starts rooting through all the files, determined to find something that incriminates Sims and points to what's actually happening here. And she seems to find it in a file tucked away in the filing cabinet at the back. A whole bunch of files, which includes one on her mother, Hannah. Juliet heads down to see Pete, wanting to know what really happened to her mom. Pete admits that he regrets shrinking into himself after they lost Juliet's brother. As for Hannah, her grief pushed her outward, and made her bolder and more determined to find the truth. She started crossing lines, and Pete tried to help her. He regrets not doing more to stop the agents and crushing Hannah's spirit the day of the magnifier relic incident, which happened to be the turning point. Pete gave up and failed her. Juliet points out that there are cameras in all the mirrors, which is how she knows now Pete wasn't lying when he said he never ratted Hannah out to judicial. The pair hug it out, but they're interrupted by an order from maintenance, who want to check the vents. This is the first time either of them have heard about this, so Juliet shows off the hard drive to her father and decides she's going to take it to walk. If anyone can get around the encryption here, it's going to be Martha. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of bag searches at different checkpoints on the stairs, which only makes things all the harder for Juliet to smuggle the relic around. Billings is also having troubles too. His tremors are back, and they're worse than before. His partner is worried, believing that Juliet is bad news and she's prepping for another rebellion. While he grapples with this, Martha receives a message from Pete about Juliet. But given she was supposed to show at 6 and it's now 7:05, she's worried that something is wrong. Sims is still behind bars, although the officers are torn between doing his bidding and following Juliet. In the end, they're stuck in a sort of limbo. Something is clearly not right, though, and Juliet brings Lucas in so they can talk. She turns on the taps and points out the hard drive. There's something here that links to SysOp, which seems to only be accessed from her work computer, and it can't be done from where they are. Lucas doubts everything until Juliet smashes the mirror and shows off the camera hidden behind. She wants his help, but Lucas refuses, pointing out that he won't compromise his mother. She leaves just in time, as judicial show up and demand she come with them. Juliet is stopped on the stairs by a simple bag check, but she manages to stall long enough for Bernard to arrive. He vouches for her and the pair head down to the crop field, right on the middle of where we saw Hannah trade off the rabbit at the start of the chapter. Down in the fields, Bernard wants to know what Juliet has. Unfortunately, it's all one big setup, as it turns out it's not Sims in charge, it's actually Bernard. Sims has been the puppet pulling the strings of another puppet. They know about the hard drive, too. "The needs of the many require the sacrifices of the few," Bernard says nonchalantly, as he claims the silo is a threat to everyone. Juliet tries to flee, but it's no good. There's too many guards. They take her bag, but on the way up the stairs, Billings arrives. Juliet pleads with him to listen, and he's torn between both sides. Sims punches Juliet in the stomach for her efforts, and she doubles over. When she notices Billings' arm shaking, she finds an opening, wrestles free from his grip, and jumps over the edge of the stairwell. Juliet tumbling down off the edge of the stairs, and landing not far down on a pathway leading out into another area of the silo. She's gone, but Sims believes Paul Billings has let her go and casts his doubts over the deputy sheriff. Bernard is not happy either when he finds out, reprimanding Sims. "Rob, I hope you understand what we're facing here," he says, as Sims doubles down on his efforts to try and find Juliet. As for Paul, he heads back home and cradles his arm, lamenting that he lost his grip. Despite taking all these medicines and herbs, his partner, Kat, believes Paul should speak up and admit he has the syndrome. She wants him back in judicial, but Paul has a duty to this position and doesn't want to give it up so quickly. Furthermore, should Paul actually come clean and admit the truth, they'll know that he lied to get the sheriff position, and they could send him out to clean. To remedy that, Paul decides to make things right, determined to catch Juliet. Sims does the rounds, sending various raiders around to different levels to those who know Juliet. Sims visits Pete in person, but he feigns ignorance and claims he knows nothing, and out of all the places that Juliet ends up, she's actually in Sims' apartment. Juliet blindsides Robert's partner, holding her up at gunpoint, urging her not to speak and handcuffing her to the kitchen. Juliet heads over and uses the computer, checking the contents of the hard drive. As the percentage slowly ticks up, Paul heads to Juliet's apartment, which is currently being turned inside out by raiders. He also has no clearance to go in there, given his role as deputy sheriff is being usurped for the good of the silo. Instead, he's told to leave. Paul decides to wait for the raiders to leave round the corner before sneaking in himself, going against silo orders and starting to believe something is not quite right here. He looks everywhere, and after removing the seal on the bathroom cabinet, takes it off and finds the Amazing Adventures book hidden behind. His hand shaking, Paul looks through the pages and is shocked by what he finds. While this goes on, Bernard decides to question Lucas about his role in all this and what he's hiding with Juliet. He reveals a number, 18, and as a result, he's locked up. As for Juliet, she manages to get into the hard drive using the code library and sifting through the files. As she does, Sims and Bernard manage to track down the hard drive, which they know is in Robert Sims's apartment. Robert's partner manages to bust herself out of the cuffs, given she has a key in her pocket, and urges Juliet that she needs to think about what she's doing. Should she decide to stay, they're going to kill her. So interestingly, she lets Juliet run away. Juliet manages to get past security again, thanks to Patrick hacking the cameras and helping her slip into his house. She makes it to his apartment and, with the help of another IT technician who reroutes the drive so it shows that it's flashing up on a completely different level, manages to hack in and check the files. That video of George Wilkins is certainly revealing, as he admits that he transferred to mechanical specifically so he could find someone to use as a guide. That person happens to be Juliet. However, he didn't account for falling in love with her, and he laments his own feelings. George, though, tells Juliet that he's found a 15-foot door of metal and she has to find it. While this is going on, Paul burns the book he found in the oven, but not before ripping a page out for himself to keep, folding it up and placing it in his pocket. As he heads back to the sheriff's office, holding the paper and contemplating his next move, we cut back to Juliet once more, who learns that the clues she's looking for happen to be on a file labeled Jane Carmody Cleaning. When she plays the video, it shows the outside world, the cam footage from our first cleaner whom we followed at the start of the series. Is this really the truth? Or another veiled lie? Juliet watching that video of the outside and believing they should broadcast what they've found across every monitor in the silo. The only way to do this, though, is to amplify the signal through IT. There's one on floor 126, but with security on every floor looking for Juliet, it seems like a suicide mission. Knowing that it'll eventually be traced back to their apartment, the trio are forced to descend together to avoid detection. While all raiders head up to floor 22, the trio are forced to head through the trash chute to evade the raiders. Sims receives a message about Billings heading into Juliet's apartment, so inevitably his frustration is vented onto the deputy sheriff. While being questioned, Billings lies and claims he didn't find anything suspicious inside, even with Sims taking his anger out on the poor chair in the room. In the heat of the moment, he does notice Paul's shaky hand and questions him over it. The trio of runaways make it down to 126, but Bernard very quickly finds them on the cameras. However, it's too late, as Juliet hooks up the hard drive and manages to link it to all the different screens. And just like that, the monitors show up with the outside world, showing the beautiful green scenery. Bernard shuts down and restarts the entire server to avoid any of this getting out. Juliet heads the opposite direction to the duo, while Bernard warns all his workers that they need to unsee what they've all seen. The level is completely shut down, and the raiders are sure they'll get her. Bernard realizes Juliet is in the trash chute and moving up and down. Unfortunately, they decide to start throwing down heavy debris to flush her out. In fact, they throw down a heavy AC unit at her. Juliet, with little other choice, lets go of the ladder she's holding onto and crashes down into mechanical. Thankfully, she's hauled to safety before she's flattened like a pancake. Judicials show up soon after, but just before they come busting in, Juliet is granted a minute alone with Martha. We don't see what they've spoken about right now, but we do get hints of this later on in the episode. Sims and Bernard bust in and apprehend her, with the latter smashing the hard drive into pieces. He's also going to shackle Juliet to take her out, mostly for show to the other silo members. However, he has a deal for her first. If Juliet waives her right to a judicial hearing and agrees to go outside to clean, he'll spare all of her friends and won't punish them. With little other choice, she agrees to the terms. In fact, Bernard even agrees to show her what happened to George if she plays ball. While Juliet is led through the silo, Martha takes a step outside her workshop for the first time in 25 years. She realizes that Juliet is relying on her, so she talks herself up and starts climbing the stairs. As she does, she visits Carla over on the supply level. They discuss the heat tape debacle in the past. Anyway, back with Juliet though, she's brought into security to see all the monitors for herself. Bernard knows this is a breach of protocol and tells the other workers as much when they watch her enter in shock. Before being sent out to clean, she's shown the surveillance footage of George Wilkins from the stairs. George actually stops in front of the cameras and decides to jump in order to hurt the silo and prevent himself from being tortured into revealing crucial information. After seeing the footage, Juliet is measured for a new suit to wear for her cleaning job. While she's prepped to head out, Lucas is not sent out to clean, but he is exiled to the mines for 10 years. Bernard forces him to haul iron ore for the duration of that tenure, and he won't be able to see outside from down there either. Martha has Juliet brought some food while she's in the holding cell. With cameras watching, Juliet notices there's a note inside, and she turns her back to it before reading what's inside. Opening the note, she sees that it reads, "You wanted the truth. The truth is, I love you. Have no fear. They're good in supply." Elsewhere, Paul decides to tell Kat the truth about what's going on. He brings up that Sims knows he has the syndrome, but he's not fired, nor do they need to move either. The mayor and the judicial are going to grant him an exemption. After hugging his wife, Paul heads back to accept the sheriff job. Bernard is there too, and he ends up having some alone time with Juliet. There, he admits that Juliet became a mortal threat to their survival in the silo once she started asking questions and learning the truth. Juliet shuns his excuses, as Bernard likens the issues in this first season as adjustments. The attention then turns to the outside, where Bernard claims that the founders left them many mysteries. But he doesn't disclose anything in particular, except more cryptic messaging. He does reveal that there's a huge crowd, bigger than any before, to watch Juliet head outside to clean. And in his last act, Bernard hands over Holston's badge, including the word truth engraved on it. In the mess hall, everyone watches, ready for Juliet to head outside. Bernard reads the final words to her and watches as Juliet heads outside. In the mess hall, it shows Juliet heading toward the tree in the distance. For Juliet, she sees the display. But it's all a lie. It's the exact same video from before, complete with the birds flying overhead. This is actually a pre-recorded video from another time. Instead of cleaning, Juliet drops the cloth and decides to walk away. "It won't be much longer," Bernard says from inside, believing that Juliet won't be able to progress. And then it happens. Juliet seems to hit another area, which fizzles the screen in and out like a hologram. She places the sheriff badge down on Holston's body nearby, which happens to be outside the perimeter, and decides not to go any further. That is, until Juliet remembers Martha's note and the words, "They're good in supply." This links back to the suit, which is absolutely airtight and without gaps as the other suits appear to have had. This also explains Holston. He realized that the visor was engineered, explaining his search for the truth, and removing his helmet, he saw the world for what it really was. Unfortunately, with the air poisoned around him, he collapsed and died. Juliet's version of events outside, though, is very different. Bernard realizes something is up and grabs a key labeled 18 and waits for the lights to turn on. As for Juliet, she moves further forward and sees the world for what it really is beyond the holographic area. It's not the beautiful area we assumed, but instead a horrific wasteland. With no other home to move back to, Juliet walks up and over the hill, disappearing from view. But we're not done for shockers yet. As it turns out, our silo is not the only one. There are numerous others stretching as far as the eye can see. This would lead us to believe that Bernard's key with 18 written on the side would mean they were in the 18th silo out of who knows however many others. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. I always love hearing from my viewers, so feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts on the video or any suggestions for future content. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.